So in addition to those shortcuts, there are other settings for our main viewport here. There are other viewports which you can access by going to this icon. And here we have the top, front, and right. You will see that each viewport has exactly the same menu above it. And let's start with the camera section. If I go to that, you can see that I can change the side or angles these cameras are showing me. So if I didn't want to just see the right view, I can switch to the left. The front view, we could change that to, let's say, the back, just depending on what I need at the time. Notice the difference in the way that our objects are being displayed. Here is the full 3D view, but in the other ones, we have the wireframe view. Well, the setting for that is found under the display tab. So if I go to display, we can see that we are in the lines mode and we are looking at the wireframe. To illustrate this more obviously, if I go back to the perspective view and under display, let's go to lines. And now we see a line representation of our 3D object. If I go back to growth shading and growth shading with lines, any mode with lines just shows you the same, except you now see the outline of the segments. I tend to jump between growth shading and then growth shading with lines. So that's these shortcuts next to that. You have NB for lines and NA for shading. So if you just press N followed by A and then N followed by B, that's how you quickly switch between those two modes. Further down the list, we have quick shading, which on the surface looks just like growth shading, but the difference is that growth shading respects light that you have in the scene. You can see as I move this around, my object reacts to the light. But in quick shading, you see that it ignores any lights that I have in the scene. Further down, we have constant shading, which ignores any lighting or any shading whatsoever, and you get something which looks very flat. So you would probably only use constant shading combined with the lines mode, so you can actually see the shape and form of your objects. To continue, let's look at the options tab, and this is to do with what kind of effects we want to preview in the viewport. So to illustrate this, I'm going to get a plane. And this is going to be my floor. So let's just enlarge this by grabbing those handles and simply moving them. We can get the cube and place it more above the surface. If I go to the light, I can go to shadow. Let's enable shadow maps soft. Now we don't see a preview of that until I hit render. However, if I had been in options and enable shadows, and now you can see we get a preview of that in the live viewport. Moving on, we have the filter menu or submenu. This allows us to choose what kind of objects we are displaying in the viewport. So our cube here and plane, these are generator type objects. So if I were to go to the filter and disable the generators, you will see those objects will disappear. Now, you are really never going to do that. So let's just go back and re-enable that. But what you may do, let's say you want to do a preview render of your animation and you just want to clean up what the viewport looks like. Well, you may do something like this, where you go to the filter and let's say disable the lights. Now, the lights is still there and its effects are still visible, but you just can't see it in the interface like you could before. And I may even go to growth shading only to get rid of the edges, just to clean up what this preview looks like. And under filter, once again, I would go and maybe disable the work plane and even this sort of a default axis indicator. We would go to filter once again, and that's the world axis. So now I have a very clean preview of my scene, and I would render this out if I was trying to preview an animation. And then when I am done, I can go back and just re-enable those things. You can utilize these settings in here. There's several things you can turn on and off. It's worth just going through each one and see what it does. Up to now, we have been accessing the settings for our viewport from this menu over here. But you can also do this by pressing Shift and V. And over in the attributes section down here, it's going to show you the viewport attributes of just this viewport. So you can see it's similar settings to what we were looking at under these menus. So here we have the shading, right? This is where we would change that. We have our filter menu, which has all the same things that we saw earlier on this list, except it's just tick boxes now. But here we even have extra options, such as if I go to the Save Frames tab, we can display a title and action boundary border, which you can even change the size of, right? That might be useful for knowing where to keep the elements on screen. And you don't want to exceed certain limits. You would set that here. This tinted area shows you everything that will be outside of the frame, and you can change the opacity of that. But I'm just going to keep it at the default. If you change any value and you want to go back to its previous default, you can simply right click and then reset to default. Make sure you're not resetting all unless you really intend to do that, because this will reset everything you have changed. So reset to default is for that particular setting. All is for all the settings. So just be careful, because I believe you cannot undo either of these things. Moving on, if I go to the back tab, you can see currently it's completely grayed out. That's because we can't change any of the settings in the normal 3D view. But if we go to any of the other views, let's say the front view, press Shift V once again to bring that back. Now you can see I can load in an image into this. So, here's a picture of me and my brother's dog. You would use this particular feature. Let's say you were modeling something and you needed a side view, a top view of the blueprints. Well, that's what this section is used for. You would load up each respective blueprint in the correct angle that you need it for, and then you would use that as reference for your 3D modeling. And you have things in here such as controlling the transparency if you don't want to see it as much, and even like the size and scaling. So that's what this back tab is for. It's literally the background of these particular type of viewports. Finally, the effects tab is the same as the first section of these options here, except once again, it's just some tick boxes.